I tried helping my wife the other day, which already sounds like a lie, because if you know me, you know helping is just me standing nearby asking questions. She didn't even ask for much. That's the crazy part. Anytime my wife says, "It's simple," I hear, "This will change our relationship." I nodded like a confident adult, the kind of man who pays bills on time and knows where the batteries are. But inside I was panicking because I still don't know which light switch controls which light in our house, and we've lived there for years. She explained it to me slowly, like she was talking to someone who might wander into traffic if left alone, and I said, "Yeah, I got it," which is exactly what people say right before they do the opposite. In my head, I wasn't just helping, I was auditioning to be the hero husband. I'm thinking she's gonna tell her friends, "You won't believe it, he actually handled it." That was the dream. The reality was me 5 minutes later, standing there, realizing I had already messed up step one, and there was no way to fix it without her noticing. That's when I started making the face. You know the face. The one where you pretend everything's fine, but your eyes are screaming for an adult. I'm moving stuff around like I'm busy, hoping the problem solves itself. I've always believed if you stare at a mistake long enough, maybe it gets embarrassed and goes away. It doesn't. It just sits there, getting bigger, like it's proud of what it's becoming. So now, I'm doing math in my head I haven't done since school. I'm estimating guessing, using confidence instead of knowledge. That's my main skill in life. I'm thinking, this looks about right, even though I have no idea what right looks like. The whole time, I can hear my wife in the other room, peaceful, trusting, living her life, not knowing her marriage is currently being tested by one man and a very small task. Then she walks back in. I can tell by her silence that something is wrong. Silence is never neutral. Silence is her brain loading. She looks at what I did, looks at me, then looks back at it like maybe it changed. And I'm just standing there smiling like, right? Because once you're in that deep, confidence is all you have left. She asks, "Why is it like this?" And I don't even answer the question she asked. I answer a different one. I say, "So here's what happened," which is code for, I made choices I don't fully understand. I start explaining my logic, and halfway through I realize I sound like a guy defending a crime he definitely committed. Even I don't believe me anymore. Now I'm trying to fix it, which only makes it worse, because apparently there's a rule in marriage that says once you mess something up, every attempt to repair it adds 10 more minutes to the argument. I'm moving things, she's sighing, and I'm saying stuff like, "Well, technically it still works, because when you're wrong, you start lowering standards real fast." At this point, I'm not even helping anymore. I've become the family disaster. Not the main problem, but the thing everyone has to deal with while fixing the real one. I can feel it. The vibe in the room changes. I'm getting that look that says, I should have just done this myself. And honestly, she's right. That's the worst part. I don't even have a defense. I'm just standing there, part of the mess, wondering how I became the least useful tool in my own house, still trying to explain why I thought this way made sense, still hoping somehow, by the end of it, she's gonna look at me and say, "You know what? That actually helped," even though deep down I know that's not how this story usually goes. I woke up that morning feeling like today was the day I finally proved I was a capable adult. Not just a man who owns a coffee mug that says, "World's okayest husband," There was no reason for this confidence, which is how I knew it was dangerous. Nothing had happened yet, but in my head, I was already picturing my wife telling people, really stepped up today, like I just saved a family of ducks from traffic. I hadn't even gotten out of the kitchen. I was already proud of myself. My wife looked at me and said she needed a little help with something. And I said yes so fast it surprised both of us. I didn't even ask what it was. That's how serious I was. That's growth. My mind, responsible people don't ask follow-up questions. They just nod like they've been waiting their whole life for this moment. I stood there with my arms crossed, trying to look like a guy who knows where tools are kept, even though I still open random drawers, hoping one of them magically turns into the right one. She explained what she wanted. I kept saying, yeah, I got it, which is something I say a lot for a man who rarely has it. But I wanted her to see confidence. I wanted her to see a man who doesn't need instructions written in 3 different ways. I wanted to be the guy in movies who fixes stuff while everyone else watches in awe, even though the only thing I've ever fixed quickly is a plate of food for myself. Inside, though, there was already a small voice asking questions I didn't want to hear. Questions like, do you actually understand this? And when was the last time you successfully did anything like this? I ignored that voice because confidence is louder, and also because admitting doubt felt like admitting defeat before the game even started. I wasn't about to do that. Not today. Today, I was a new man. I started talking bigger than the situation required, saying things like, this won't take long, and you don't even have to worry about it, which is bold language for someone who once spent 20 minutes trying to figure out why the TV wouldn't turn on before realizing it wasn't plugged in. In that moment, I believed my own hype. I was selling the dream, and I was the first customer. I even adjusted my posture, standing straighter, moving slower, like responsible people do. I noticed how calm I looked on the outside compared to how fast my brain was running on the inside. That's my special skill. Either way, I can look relaxed while internally preparing for disaster. It's like emotional multitasking. She handed things over to me, and I felt this rush, like I'd just been trusted with something important, even if it was small. Especially because it was small. Small things are tricky. Big things, everyone expects you to mess up. Small things come with expectations, and expectations are heavy. You can feel them in your hands, even when nothing weighs anything. I told her, go ahead, I've got this, and she hesitated for half a second, just half. But I saw it. Tiny pause was like her brain saying, do you though? And my brain yelling back, absolutely, even though we both knew we were taking a risk. She walked away. I watched her go like a hero watching the door close before a mission, thinking this is it. This is my moment to finally show I'm not just helpful in theory, I'm helpful in real life. I'm the kind of husband who can be trusted with a simple task, the kind of man who doesn't turn small favors into stories people tell later, the kind of guy who makes this look easy. She said, it's simple. And that's when my stomach dropped, because none that starts with those words has ever been simple for me. That's not encouragement, that's a warning label. People only say, it's simple, when they're talking to someone they think might overcomplicate breathing. Nodded like that helped. My head, I was already replaying every time in my life I'd heard that phrase, and it ended with someone else doing the job while I stood nearby pretending to learn something. The task itself didn't even sound serious. That's what made it scary. It was one of those everyday things people do without thinking, which means there's no room for creativity. You can't improvise simple. Simple has rules, and rules are where I start to struggle because I always think there's a shortcut nobody else noticed, and it turns out nobody else noticed because it doesn't work. She explained it step by step, and each step sounded easy on its own. But when she put them together, my brain started buffering. I was still processing step 1 when she was already on step 4. I'm nodding the whole time like a politician who didn't hear the question. They're smart. I didn't want to stop her because I didn't want to look unprepared, even though being unprepared is kind of my brand. I kept thinking, why does this feel like she's handing me the controls to an airplane and saying, just keep it steady? Everyone else would hear that and think, okay, no problem. I hear that and think, I don't even know what steady feels like. I don't even know which part is the wheel. But I'm smiling because apparently smiling is my safety helmet. She said, just don't overthink it, which is hilarious because overthinking is the only way I know how to think. I can turn tying my shoes into a strategy meeting. I'll stand there wondering if today is the day I try a new knot, like that's gonna change my life. So when she tells me not to overthink, what I hear is, please don't be yourself for 5 minutes. I repeated the instructions back to her to show I was listening, but I changed a few words, which should have been a sign. Not on purpose. My brain just edits things. Turned, make sure it's lined up, into make sure it looks about right, because that feels more achievable. About right is my comfort zone. It leaves room for excuses later. She asked, you good? And I said, yeah, good. But what I meant was, I think I understand the general idea of what you want, and I'm hoping reality is flexible. That's the gap where all my confidence lies. Not in knowledge, but in hope. Strong hope. Olympic level hope. In my mind, I was already simplifying it even more. I was breaking it down into my own version that made sense to me, which is dangerous because my version usually ignores important details like measurements, directions, and common sense. But I told myself, simple is simple. People do this every day. There's no way I can mess up something this basic. That's when I knew I was in trouble. Because anytime I say there's no way, life hears that as a challenge. She handed it over and walked away, still calm, still trusting, and now I was alone with the simplest task in the world, which somehow already felt heavier than anything I'd lifted all week, standing there thinking, okay, just do what she said. Don't add anything. Don't fix what isn't broken. Don't turn a straight line into a personal interpretation. Just keep it simple, because simple people do simple things successfully all the time. And I am definitely one of those people. At least that's what I was telling myself right before I took my first step. The moment she walked away, my brain decided this was the perfect time to start a full committee meeting. Every thought I'd been ignoring showed up at once, all talking over each other. Somehow I was supposed to be in charge. I stared at what I was supposed to do, and it looked easy, which made me suspicious because easy has never trusted me. I leaned in closer, like maybe there was a hidden trick only responsible people could see. But all I saw was the same simple situation, waiting for a man who actually knew what he was doing. I started doing math that had no numbers in it, just vibes. I'm estimating distances with my eyes, telling myself things like, looks about right, even though I have no idea what about right is based on. I don't measure, I feel. My feelings have been wrong before a lot. But I kept going because once you commit to a bad method, changing it feels like admitting something about yourself you're not ready to accept. In my head, I'm building a whole system. I'm creating rules nobody asked for. If this goes here, then that should probably go there. Unless it goes here, which would also make sense if you think about it in a different way, which I was. I'm thinking in circles, convincing myself each new idea is smarter than the last, even though all I'm really doing is getting further away from the instructions she gave me 5 minutes ago. Catch myself pausing, looking around the room like someone might walk in and give me a hint, but it's just me. No lifelines, no audience participation, just a man and his confidence trying to solve a problem that didn't need solving. I start rearranging things, not because they're wrong, but because they could be more right. That's a dangerous mindset. That's how you turn a small task into a personal project. I tell myself I'm being careful. That sounds responsible. Careful people are good people. But really, I'm just scared to make a final decision, so I keep adjusting. A little left. No, too much. Back a bit. Now it's worse, but I can't stop because stopping would mean accepting wherever I landed. I don't trust any place I choose. I even start explaining my logic out loud, which is something you only do when you're trying to convince yourself. I'm saying things like, well, if you think about it, even though I'm the only one there to think about it, I'm narrating my own confusion like that's going to turn it into clarity. It doesn't, just makes me sound like a guy arguing with an invisible jury. At some point, I realize I've been working for a while, and that worries me because simple things shouldn't take time. If this were really as easy as she said, I should be done already, standing there proud, waiting for praise. Instead, I'm deep into my process, which now involves multiple attempts, tiny changes, a growing pile of mental excuses for why this still counts as progress. I look at what I've done and try to imagine her reaction. I'm picturing her face, trying to guess if this version of reality matches the one she had in mind. That's when I start justifying. I tell myself, she didn't say it had to be perfect. She said simple. And simple is relative. Simple to her might be different than simple to me. That's fair, right? That's a reasonable argument if you don't think about it too hard, which I refuse to do. So I take a step back, tilt my head, and decide it's good enough, because good enough is how most of my life has worked out. I tell myself this is what confidence looks like, this moment where you stop changing things and stand by your choice. If deep down you know your choice was built on guesses, hope, and a strong desire for this to somehow work out in your favor when she finally comes back in the room. I heard the door behind me click. My first instinct was to act casual, like nothing had happened, like I wasn't in the middle of creating a situation that could be described as chaotic if anyone were paying attention. My wife didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her silence was loud. That kind of silence that makes you feel like you're being observed by someone with X-ray vision, someone who can see every misstep, every wrong move, every tiny detail you hope no one would notice. I stood there smiling, because smiling is easier than explaining, and also because it's my default mode when I realize things are worse than I thought. She didn't move at first, just stood in the doorway, and I could feel her measuring everything I'd done. Not judging yet, and they're smart not scolding, but definitely scanning. Her eyes were doing the heavy lifting. That's the kind of quiet that communicates volumes. It's the pause before the verdict, the calm before the storm, and somehow even though she's saying nothing. I can feel the tension in the room climbing like it's doing pull-ups without a gym membership. I tried to focus on one thing, pretending it was deliberate. Adjusting my stance, moving an object slightly, muttering under my breath in case she was listening. Yeah, that looks fine. My words were meant to reassure her, but mostly they were meant to reassure me. I could see her watching my every motion, and I realized this is the point where a simple task stops being simple and starts being an interrogation. She's not even talking. That's the genius of it. She doesn't have to say a thing. I'm already convicted. I started narrating what I was doing, partly to buy time, partly to justify, partly because I had no better plan. I said things like, I'm making sure this is aligned, and I double-checked everything just to be safe, which is true if you ignore the fact that I just guessed at half of it. The funny thing is, I convinced myself I was providing helpful information, but I could hear the way silence stretched between us like it was testing me, like it wanted to see if I'd crack under the weight of observation. I didn't, not yet. I smiled harder. They're smart. That's what I do when danger is invisible, but definitely present. Her eyes shifted from the task to me and back again. That look, it's subtle but potent. The one that says, I'm disappointed, letting you figure out why on your own. I've learned in life that the longer she holds that look, the more obvious the mistakes are, even if you haven't noticed them yet. I started second, guessing every choice I'd made, even the ones I was proud of, which made my small movements slower, more deliberate, like I was trying to communicate to her silently that I was competent, that I had control, that I was in charge. Even as my brain screamed the opposite, I thought about explaining, but I realized words might make it worse. So I kept moving, adjusting, pausing, and narrating in that quiet, ridiculous way that only someone who's aware of their impending doom does. Every sigh she avoided, every tilt of the head, felt like it was magnifying my mistakes. I was trapped in a loop of trying to prove something that didn't need proving, in a task that shouldn't have been complicated, under the gaze of someone who didn't need to say a thing to make me feel accountable for every single micro decision I'd made in the last 5 minutes. Then, just as I thought I had a handle on it, I noticed her leaning slightly, just a fraction, as if she was calculating whether she should intervene or watch the disaster unfold. And in that tiny movement, realized silence could be sharper than words, more judgmental than any explanation I could muster, and yet somehow infinitely more comedic, because all I could do was stand there, adjust slightly, narrate my own choices, and hope my confidence was enough to keep the situation from completely collapsing under the weight of her observation. By the time I realized what was happening, I wasn't helping anymore. That's a strange place to reach in your life. The moment where your confidence turns against you, and suddenly the simple task has a life of its own. You're just another element in the chaos. I'd started off thinking I could make this easier for everyone, thinking I could swoop in and be the hero husband who handles a small thing flawlessly, but somewhere along the way became part of the problem. I was no longer a contributor. I was the obstacle, the unexpected complication nobody anticipated, the human version of a pop quiz nobody asked for. Every small movement I made only added to the complexity. I'd think I was adjusting something to make it better, but instead it ended up slightly worse, and then slightly worse again. I'd step back, inspect my work, and convince myself that no, this is fine, this is progress, this is my masterpiece. That's when the comedy hits. Because in my mind, I'm solving everything. They're smart, but reality has already decided I'm just adding layers to a mess that doesn't need layers. It's a dangerous combination. Confidence plus creativity plus a total misunderstanding of the task at hand. I started to notice the expressions on my wife's face as she returned, eyes scanning, subtle shifts in posture, tiny sighs that speak louder than words. She's not yelling, not intervening, just observing, which is worse because observation without guidance makes me invent my own rules, and my rules are spectacularly flawed. I adjust one thing, another, narrating every move as if commentary might prevent disaster. My explanations could retroactively fix mistakes that already exist. I'm talking, moving, pausing, thinking, all at once, like some overly ambitious orchestra conductor leading a symphony nobody asked for. Realize now that being the family disaster isn't about failing at the task itself. It's about the fact that I've created a mini crisis around something completely mundane. The whole situation revolves around my ego, my insistence that I can handle it, my utter lack of awareness that confidence without competence only multiplies errors. Every adjustment I make is a tiny declaration of independence from logic, a subtle protest against simple instructions, a comedic exploration of how one man can complicate a life that was perfectly fine 5 minutes ago. My wife walks closer, still quiet, still watching, and I can feel the pressure building. I try to defend my actions, explain my logic, convince her and myself that the way I approached it was reasonable, necessary even, like I'm narrating my own trial in front of an audience of one. The more I justify, the more tangled I become, until I realize I'm no longer just the helper. I am now a central feature of the story. I am the twist, the unexpected punchline, the reason the narrative exists at all. Without me, there is no disaster, no tension, no humor. I am the linchpin of the chaos, the moving part everyone else has to navigate while fixing the original problem. At this point, the room has shifted. The task itself has become background noise. My presence dominates. I am aware of it, which makes it even more difficult to think clearly, which makes my actions even more unpredictable. Every gesture, every decision, defensive comment builds on the previous ones in a slow motion avalanche of comedic mishaps. And in that awareness, there is a strange thrill, because the audience, whether imagined or real, can see the absurdity, can feel the tension, can predict the inevitable collision of intent and reality, all while I continue to operate under the delusion that I am in full control, still hopeful that somehow my involvement will be seen as heroic rather than catastrophic. By the time I realized what had happened, I was already in full defense mode. I tried to explain my logic as if walking her through my thinking would make it okay. Well, you see, I thought that if I moved this here, then it would balance better with that over there. I said, even though the audience for my explanation was just her silently judging every word. I could see her tilting her head, not annoyed yet, but definitely evaluating whether I was credible. That look alone was enough to make me question every decision I'd made in the last 10 minutes. I was narrating my own crime scene, hoping my storytelling skills could cover the evidence of my failure. I started justifying, elaborating more and more reasons why each tiny change I'd made was necessary. Each sentence was longer than the last, my words spilling out faster than my brain could organize them. But I kept going. It felt important to make it sound intentional, like I had some grand strategy the rest of the world couldn't see. I even paused at moments to nod at my own points, as if acknowledging them would reinforce their truth. Of course, that only made me look more suspicious. While I talked, I was still moving things around, adjusting, tweaking, sometimes without thinking. It's like my hands had their own agenda, independent from my brain. They were trying to fix the mistakes I had already made while simultaneously creating new ones, all under the guise of being helpful. My voice provided a running commentary, which I convinced myself would make it easier for her to understand my choices. It didn't. It made the room louder, more chaotic, my sense of authority even thinner. I kept inventing logic on the spot. Every time she gave me a look, interpreted it differently. Was it disappointment? Was it amusement? Was it a test? Each interpretation led me to a new line of defense, and suddenly I was in a spiral of explanations. Imagined her telling the story later. He tried, bless him, and I desperately wanted to control the story before she got the chance. The more I tried, the more entangled I became, till the original task, simple as it was, became a distant memory overshadowed by my own dramatic performance. Then I noticed the tension in my shoulders, in my neck, in the way I was pacing my hands, and I realized I was overperforming, over-explaining, over-adjusting, but I couldn't stop, because stopping would be admitting I had lost control, admitting that in front of her, even though she hadn't said a word, felt like defeat. I was narrating my own unraveling, still trying to convince everyone, myself included, that I was competent, that I knew what I was doing. Disaster was temporary and fixable. I could see her watching, listening, and not interrupting, which somehow made it worse. Silence has weight, and hers carried judgment, curiosity, the quiet understanding that nothing I said would truly reverse what had already happened. Every word I uttered seemed to add to the problem, yet I couldn't stop, because once you've started defending yourself, stopping feels like surrender. I kept weaving explanations, hypothetical scenarios, and invented rationales, hoping one of them would stick, hoping one of them would convince her that the mess was actually under control, hoping one of them might make her laugh before she realized that I had officially become the disaster she hadn't asked for, but that now defined the story, the room, and somehow me. And in the end, I stood there surveying the aftermath of my so-called help, realizing that sometimes trying to be useful just turns you into the problem. My wife didn't yell, didn't lecture. She just looked at me with that calm, slightly disappointed expression that says, I trusted you, and now we're here. And you know what? That's fine, because that's marriage. You try, you fail spectacularly, you become a walking disaster for a few minutes, and somehow everyone survives. And me. I learned that being helpful isn't always about fixing things. It's about surviving the consequences with a little dignity, a lot of humor, and maybe, just maybe, a quiet promise to never volunteer for something that seems simple ever again.